دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Finding Me in the ITV networks. Tonight with me is a very special guest, someone who needs absolutely no introduction, and that is Advocate Thuli Madonsela, the former public protector. I would also like to extend a special thanks to Professor Lorenzo Feuer-Monti and the Center for the Study of Governance Innovation for affording me this opportunity to have a quick discussion with the advocate at their very special evening. So with that, I'd like to say welcome, Advocate, and thank you very much for being here with me tonight and for sharing this time. Thank you for your generosity.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
So I want to start tonight addressing you as a parent, not as an advocate, not as the former public protector, but as a parent. How do you understand the Fees Must Fall protests and the messages contained therein? Looking at it and considering, of course, that you have a child at the university as well.
I believe that the Fees Must Fall protest is a cry for social justice. It's a timely cry, a sad cry. It's something that we should have done incrementally in the last 22 years. Unfortunately, in doing all sorts of things, the whole question of equity in education or social justice in education didn't receive the full attention it deserved. And some of the young people are at the point where they're extremely angry and extremely hurt because of the hardships that they've reached. And because of that, the manner in which they're articulating their demands is a bit testing at times.
So, one of the Fees Must Fall community Twitter members, she wrote this and she said that what underlies the demand for free education is in fact a revolt against engineered poverty. And she says then that whites are responsible for this. So it brings in the racial dynamics in terms of the socio-economic structure in South Africa, the division in South Africa. South Africa is divided socio-economically according to race. Would you agree with this comment?
It is true that white supremacy during colonialism and under apartheid is responsible for the legacy. What I have a problem with, though, is when everything gets blamed on the past, because we then deny ourselves agency and the ability to change our own lives. If you look at Botswana, soon after democracy, education was a primary investment area. And because of that, Botswanans were able to develop the country, but secondly, to migrate whenever they didn't want to stay in Botswana. South Africans, part of their anger is because they're trapped in South Africa. If you're not educated, you can't go to other countries. And yes, it is part of the legacy of the past, but it's also lapses in the 22 years of democracy.
Okay, but so basically what you're saying is you cannot actually exclude the past, but you need to be cognizant of the present and hold the present accountable as well.
I think so.
Okay, so the thing is that I know I'm coming to your position as a professional and as a human rights lawyer, and there are limitations to human rights. What happens is that in the protests we see there are competing rights between the protesters and the non-protesters, both articulating from a position of rights, right? Right to go back to class, the right to protest. And so we have very many different articulations of human rights. But do you agree that by claiming a particular human right, it's not necessarily equal to establishing justice, especially in South Africa, because claiming a particular human right might not deliver justice?
No, that's true. If we don't look at human rights as equal and indivisible, we do stand the risk of giving primacy to some human rights at the expense of others. And obviously in that case then you suffer injustice, particularly social injustice. But regarding the right to go to class and not to go to class, I personally do think that I'm a former trade unionist. I always felt that the right to strike also included the right not to strike. If you choose not to strike, violence should not be used to force you to strike.
Okay, so then would you then say that free speech as a right is more powerful or more important than justice?
I think there are people who say that, who take an absolutist approach to freedom of speech, but that's not the approach taken by Section 16 of our Constitution, because we are given the right to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, which also includes freedom of the media, but there are internal limitations to that right, plus external limitations in terms of Section 36. Words hurt. Words can hurt as much as swords can hurt. And we have to take into account those things as we articulate freedom of speech. We don't want to unnecessarily constrain freedom of speech, but in my exercising my freedom of speech, I shouldn't diminish your human dignity. Human dignity is one of those non-derogable rights.
So you quoted something now in terms of an anecdote or a metaphor, proverbs as well. I see you on Twitter, you very often give nice pieces of wisdom, and one of them that I particularly liked was when you said that when you realized a long time ago that traveling with a scorpion will not stop them from stinging you, it will just delay the bite or the sting.
Certainly.
Yes.
Well, it's about people who support wrongdoing, though, who would support wrongdoers, because wrongdoers might hurt somebody else with my assistance today, but tomorrow they'll come back to hurt me.
That is true. So now that brings me to a particular question, I think, which is very much related to this. How do you balance ethics and justice against the claimants of rights that contradicts ethics and justice? So there's certain, these moral arguments that people put forward, and they use the articulation of rights, but then at the same time it's contradictory to the notions of ethics and justice.
It's a difficult thing about ethics and justice, because it depends on where do you base your ethics. For me, I always start with ethics as based on the Constitution. Section 195 if you're dealing with ethics for public servants, Section 96 if you're dealing with ethics for members of the executive, and just generally the principles, the values that underpin the Constitution, such as human dignity, equality, etc. Justice is an important concept, but substantive justice includes the right to equality.
So now let me ask you a difficult question. Can one be neutral on issues of injustice and oppression?
On issues of injustice, you can't be neutral. However, what I do believe is the methods of how we fight injustice. For example, I found myself in a situation where some people who believe that if you are anti-Israel, then you can't go to a gathering that is organized by people who support Israel, even though that gathering itself is not about supporting Israel. I believe in the foundations that built South Africa, which is dialogue is what made us where we are. And I believe that you can't leave people who believe things in a particular way in a little corner where you can't bring your ideas to them. And my approach has always been conversations with everyone. Doesn't need when you endorse what they stand for, but you find an opportunity for dialogue, because you might just influence them to believe in the kind of justice that you believe in.
So in that case then, and you brought this up, and so I have to ask you this question because my audience will never forgive me then.
Yes.
Do you believe then that it's the same in terms of ethics and injustice and ethics and oppression, that to address a gathering of people who actively support the Israeli state in terms of funding and the mandate of the state, is that the same as talking to just ordinary Jewish people or ordinary South Africans? Because on the one hand, this is an organization that has a mandate from the state, and these are just, and on the other hand, it's communities who are different. So for example, for instance, if you had to go and talk at that time to a pro-apartheid organization, would that be the same as talking to the whites of South Africa?
No, it's not the same, but I would still believe that you must speak to those who are racist in the same way that Yasser Arafat started speaking to the Israelis. That's why we have the kind of peace deal that we have. Of course, it's a peace deal that is currently derailed precisely because the current leader of Israel does not particularly support negotiations. But for me, the approach is the only way you can find out what the next person is thinking is by going to talk to them. But the only way also they can get to know what you think about justice is going to them. For example, in that speech, one of my favorite sayings is, as long as there is injustice somewhere, there can't be peace anywhere.
Exactly. No justice, no peace, right?
And then I also speak about a notion of justice that is just us is not consistent with peace. If you're going to look after your neighbor as only people who look like yourself, you're fooling yourself, because everyone in the world is your neighbor. If anyone in the world is suffering, regardless of what they look like, you're in danger too.
That is true, and I think what you're speaking about a lot is from the concepts of Ubuntu and Ummah also.
Exactly.
That, love for your brother what you love
Absolutely.
for yourself.
Absolutely.
And so, I've been following your story for a long time. But at the moment, I have to say, that's why when I looked at you and I said, are you tired? Because from where I'm sitting, I think that you're in a very difficult position at the moment, because there's people coming at you from different sides. You're still, today was the day of the state capture report that went into court. I mean, you're carrying a mountain on your shoulders. And at the same time, you have to navigate a way forward for yourself. How do you put this? Because of course, not everybody will love you. So,
no, that's true.
Yes. So how do you navigate that way forward?
I think the first part is to give up the expectation that everyone should love you. You've got to allow people to be themselves and know that the most important critic is the one inside your own body, or your own conscience is the most important critic. But how I navigate it is really to let go of people and understanding that I'm not perfect and other people are not perfect. And sometimes when they criticize me, they're wrong. But they don't mean to be ugly. They are doing what they know. When they know better, they'll do better.
And so now you're moving on to a new position. I know you've been given the social justice chair at the University of Stellenbosch. In my opinion, that's still very contradictory, because if you look at who the chancellor is at Stellenbosch, it's a very contradictory, it's very controversial person, an apartheid legacy, etc. Do you think you'll be able to take the chair and bring something positive? I mean, Stellenbosch has been one of those universities that wrote some of the apartheid legislation.
Exactly. In fact, that's precisely my decision. I had offers from Wits. I had approaches from virtually every university in this country, including an approach for a vice-chancellor position, and the answer was no. I chose somewhere where I thought it was uncharted territory, where I can make a difference. If I fail, I will fail trying.
And at least you can say you tried.
Exactly. Going to people where you preach to the choir is not really a challenge.
Exactly, and I think that you need a very strong voice. And in Stellenbosch, because people have been afraid for the longest time to speak up there.
And the team that I'm working with, the VC, the Professor Human, is somebody who's really committed to social justice herself. And these are people I've worked with over the years as a guest speaker who have been trying to have conversations on social justice with students and making changes because of those conversations with students.
And so in terms of the youth that you see, what's happening in South Africa, the burgeoning minds, the critical discourses, the amazing arguments that they're putting forth. And then on the other hand, this barrage of onslaught that you're facing from the older generation, how do you understand or envision a new South Africa or a future South Africa from 2017?
I think South Africa is destined to great things. They say the darkest hour is just before dawn. What they don't say also is that the darkest hour is the most intense part of the night. That's why after the darkest hour, the dawn breaks.
And it's the most beautiful part of the morning as well, I think so, because that's when life begins again. Eh? Can you give us some parting words and parting wisdom?
Well, it's just to say that we've been a resilient nation, a great nation, built on hope, our love for each other, our love of this nation, and faith in each other, that we can hold each other's hands and we can build this nation. One of the things, though, we need to remind ourselves as South Africans is that we did say South Africa belongs to all who live in it. And sometimes when we get so stressed, we're so annoyed with the enduring legacy of apartheid, we start tearing each other apart and we start attacking each other. Because you are white, we make presumptions about you. Because you're a foreigner, I make presumptions about you. I would say, let's find out each other's stories. Let's see whether we can build bridges. The older generations built bridges. We had the Natal Indian Congress, the ANC, which was the Native Indian, the Native Congress, and then we had the White Congress of Democrats. These were people who were divided by apartheid, but they found an opportunity for common ground to fight the system, not each other. I believe that the challenges we face right now require us to exercise a certain level of ethical leadership, but also reminding ourselves of who we are and what we chose to become.
One last question. Do you think recalling your memory and dealing with it is an essential process for the healing of South Africans?
It is essential. Remembering who you are, what your dreams were, what you chose to abandon, and what you've been journeying towards is always important, because otherwise we start getting bogged down with ideas, bogged down with feelings, and we forget what is the vision, but also what's the history that we're moving away from.
Thank you very much, Advocate, and I think it's a powerful message to take home, especially for all of us who forget sometimes our identity, and we forget that, of course, that it's the past that brought us to this particular moment.
Absolutely. It's fear that divided us. It's love that's going to liberate us. And love does not have to see color, religion, nationality, or anything like that.
But featuring into that love, there also needs to be a process of justice. Like you said, no justice, no peace, right?
There can be no justice without reparations and reconciliation.
Thank you very much.
It's been
It was
a
a
pleasure.
pleasure speaking to you. في أمان الله والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
ودين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء.
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار.